Well, hopefully this video is going to work. For some quirky reason, my computer's lagging today. Probably needs a reboot. Too many videos. So Glenn lives in his home in Paradise, California. And as you recall, a few years ago, Paradise suffered some pretty bad wildfires. So his basis in the home is $450,000. Its fair market value is $600,000. And his home is destroyed in a wildfire. Unfortunately, Glenn didn't have great insurance. So his insurance pays him only $300,000. Pretty clear Glenn's having a bad year. His home is completely destroyed. His underserved insurance isn't getting him back in his home. And so he probably doesn't have a lot of money. And so the code contemplates a deductible loss for a catastrophic loss such as this. And it's called the casualty and theft loss. So for businesses, this isn't a big deal because as we've learned, loss is pretty much generally deductible anyway for a business. But for individuals, this is a big deal because personal losses are not generally deductible. So what we've done is we've carved out a situation in which, based on kind of this taxpayer having a specific need, we're going to go ahead and let them deduct the loss to lower their taxes, in theory, help them get back on their feet. So first we got to know, what's a casualty? A casualty is an identifiable cause of a loss that is sudden and unexpected in nature. For example, earthquakes, floods, shipwrecks, storms. These are all casualties. Slow erosion, termites, items that are progressive in nature. These are not casualties. So theft is just theft, right? That's pretty, most of us have a pretty basic understanding of what theft is. But what we're going to find is that the current code really limits our ability to take a loss on theft. Generally, theft would be deducted in the year of discovery. Okay. So obviously, qualification as a casualty is extremely meaningful for individuals. So sudden, unexpected, or unusual. These days, so through 2025, in order for a personal casualty loss to be deducted, it must be associated with a federally declared disaster. If it is, then there's what's called a $100 floor and then a 10% of AGI floor. So both of those things are going to apply to any casualty and theft losses. And don't worry, we'll go through a calculation of that. So there's a federally declared disaster and there's a qualified federally declared disaster. Now, we haven't had a qualified federally declared disaster really since 2020, and it just happened to extend a little bit into 2021. So, for example, there were a couple of hurricanes, California wildfires up in the Napa area. All those were qualified federally declared disasters. So think of that as a step above just a simple federally declared disaster. In this case, what happens is that minimum floor goes from 100 to 500, and the 10% of AGI floor is completely eliminated. And since casualty and theft losses are an itemized deduction, if it's a qualified federally declared disaster, then you can take it even if you're taking the standard deduction. So Macy's car was destroyed in a qualified federally declared disaster. Her loss was $16,000. Her AGI was $6,700. In this case, her loss would be, her deductible loss would be the $16,000 loss minus the $500 floor, which leaves a $15,500 deduction. And again, she could take that whether she itemizes or not. That's not the case with a federally declared disaster. All right. If Macy's car is destroyed in a federally declared disaster, same loss, $16,000, AGI $6,700. Let's watch how we calculate this. So first we get rid of the $100. So think of that as the nuisance amount. So 16,000 minus 100 is 15,900. That's the maximum amount we can claim. Then it's subjected to a floor of 10% of the taxpayer's AGI. Well, 10% of 67,000 is 6,700. As a result, she could deduct 9,200 as an itemized deduction for casualty losses. If she doesn't itemize, she can't take it. Okay, so the amount of the loss seems pretty straightforward based on what we just discussed, but it is not straightforward. So the amount of the loss will differ between whether it's a business casualty loss or a personal casualty loss. So if the property is completely destroyed, then the business casualty loss is the basis that you have in that property. The personal casualty loss is the lesser of the fair market value or the basis in that property. So here, let's do a quick example of that. Imagine the car in the previous example that was destroyed. Well, for personal property, personal use property perspectives, most personal property is not worth what you paid for it, right? Because as soon as you drive it off the lot. So, pretty good chance the fair market value of that property is lower than the basis. Well, that would be the amount of the loss that Macy could have taken. If it's a partial destruction, then the rule is the same. It's the lesser of the decline in fair market value or the basis. There are weird rules, and they're worth a little bit of attention because you can actually generate a casualty gain. So this would occur if your insurance exceeds the amount of loss that we just described. So if you generate a casualty gain, then you can offset that with your personal casualty losses, even if they're not federally declared disasters. That doesn't say not qualified. That's just not even a federally declared disaster. Casualty gains are not subject to $100 or a 10% of AGI floor. And of course, you must reduce any loss by the amount of insurance proceeds that you get. In certain instances, which is any instance that's a federally declared disaster area, you can actually amend your prior year return so you can claim an immediate refund. This is the idea is, hey, let's get the cash in the hands of the taxpayer as quickly as possible. Okay, one more note on casualty and theft losses. So again, the federally declared disaster requirement is in place 2018 to 2025. The 2021 House tax bill included a retroactive restatement back to 2018 that would no longer require the federally declared part to claim a loss. Because as you can imagine, like a theft loss, federally declared disaster, you got to be kidding me, right? I mean, when do you suffer a theft from a federally declared disaster? Again, I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's unlikely. But all these provisions will expire at the end of 2025. So I'm guessing that you'll see this again, right? That's why we're spending time on it, because the reality is casualty losses are pretty rare these days, especially personal casualty losses.